For 2,000 years, one image has been burned into the hard drive of Western civilization. Ask anyone, who was Mary Magdalene? The answer comes instantly. The repentant prostitute, the sinful woman who washed Jesus' feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. A symbol of sin redeemed, forever grateful, forever secondary. We see her in priceless art, in countless films, in sermons, every Easter. But what if that entire story is a lie? Not a mistake, not a misinterpretation, a deliberate, calculated 1,400-year-old lie. A systematic campaign of character assassination designed to silence, discredit, and erase the single most important figure in early Christianity after Jesus himself. What if the woman you've been taught to pity was actually the one you were supposed to follow? Let's fast forward to the year 591 AD. The Roman Empire is crumbling. The world is descending into darkness. And in Rome, a powerful man named Pope Gregory the Great steps up to a pulpit. With one sermon, he accomplishes what no army could. He rewrites history. Gregory declared that 3 separate women mentioned in the Gospels were, in fact, the same person. First, Mary of Magdala. Second, Mary of Bethany, the sister of Lazarus. And third, most critically, the unnamed, sinful woman from the Gospel of Luke. And just like that, the apostle to the apostles, the woman who stood by the cross when the men fled, the first person to witness the resurrection, was demoted. She was merged with a prostitute. This wasn't a theological accident. This was a political move, a masterstroke of propaganda. Why? Because you can control a repentant sinner. You can pity her. You can forgive her. But you cannot control a rival authority. You cannot control the woman who held teachings so profound, so secret, that they threatened the very foundation of the institution Peter was building. You see, for the first 500 years of Christianity, this was the central battle. It wasn't just about faith, it was about knowledge. And Mary Magdalene had knowledge that made the men uncomfortable. Here's the receipt. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the Roman Catholic Church itself. In 1969, only a few decades ago, the Vatican quietly, almost silently, admitted the error. They officially declared that Mary Magdalene is not the sinful woman. They removed the prostitute label Gregory had pinned on her 1,400 years prior. They admitted to 1,400 years of fake news. But it was too late. The damage was done. The label is cemented in our culture. This raises the 2,000-year-old question. If she wasn't the prostitute, who was she? Why did they need to lie so elaborately? What were they hiding? The answer isn't in Rome. It's not in the Vatican archives. The answer was buried in the sands of Egypt. In 1896, German archaeologists discovered an ancient Coptic manuscript in Cairo, a text that had been lost for centuries. It was titled The Gospel of Mary. This is not a gospel about her. This is a gospel by her. It records her teachings. It records her true place among the disciples. And when you read it, you realize this isn't a story of redemption from sin. This is a story of a power struggle, a bitter, jealous power struggle between 2 people, Mary Magdalene and the disciple named Peter. This text doesn't just reveal Mary's true role with Jesus, it reveals the secret teachings that Peter never understood and did everything in his power to suppress. What we are about to uncover isn't just forgotten history, it's an entirely different version of Christianity, a version that lost the power struggle. And when you see it, you will never read the Bible the same way again. The Gospel of Mary is a radical text, not just for what it says, but for the scene it describes. The surviving manuscript, which scholars date to the early 2nd century, is fragmented. Pages are missing, but what remains is an explosion. It opens after the resurrection. Jesus has appeared to the disciples, given his final words, and then departed, ascending into the light. This is the moment of crisis. The leader is gone, the mission is ahead, and the world that just crucified their master now wants them dead. The canonical Gospels, like the book of Acts, paint a picture of order. They tell us Peter stood up, took charge, gave a powerful speech, and the church was born. It's a clean, simple, male-led hierarchy from day one. But the Gospel of Mary shows us the raw footage. It reveals what really happened in that room, moments after Jesus left, and it is anything but orderly. The text says the disciples were devastated. They were weeping. They were paralyzed by fear. They weren't filled with holy confidence. They were terrified. They said to each other, How are we to go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel of the kingdom? If they did not spare him, how will they spare us? They were broken, defeated, ready to give up before the mission had even begun. And then one person stands up. But it isn't Peter. Mary Magdalene rises. She doesn't weep. She isn't afraid. She comforts them. She's the only one in the room acting with apostolic authority. The text says she turned their hearts to the good and began to console them. She says, "Do not weep or be uncertain or be hesitant, for his grace will be entirely with you and will protect you." How could she be so sure? How could she possess this profound peace when the others were falling apart? Because, as she is about to reveal, she had received a level of teaching the others had not. She understood the plan. They only understood the pain. Mary then shares with them a private teaching, a vision, a discourse on the nature of the soul that Jesus gave to her. And this is where the confrontation erupts. When she finishes, the room is silent. The first to speak is not Peter, but the disciple Andrew. Andrew, filled with doubt, says, "Say what you wish about what she has said. I at least do not believe that the Savior said this, for certainly these teachings are strange." He doesn't attack her. He just calls her ideas strange. But then Peter explodes. He doesn't just question the teaching, he questions her. He sneers, and the text quotes him directly. He turns on Mary and asks the question that defines the next 2,000 years of church politics. Did he really speak with a woman privately without our knowledge? He continues, are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? Let's stop and analyze that. This is not a theological debate. This is raw, human jealousy. Peter is not saying your teaching is incorrect. He is saying, why would Jesus tell you and not us? He couldn't possibly have preferred you. This is the moment, the schism, the seed of the entire conspiracy. Dr. Karen King of Harvard Divinity School, one of the world and foremost experts on this gospel, notes that this text is a window into the real-world conflicts over leadership in the early church. It wasn't about doctrine. It was about who had the right to interpret Jesus' message. Peter represents the orthodox, view the public teachings, the structured church, the hierarchy. Mary represents the Gnostic or secret view, the inner teachings, direct spiritual experience, and authority based on understanding, not on title. In this moment, Mary is devastated by the attack. The text says, she wept. She wasn't weeping from fear. She was weeping because the men who were supposed to be her brothers had just betrayed her, driven by jealousy. It is another disciple, Levi, who finally stands up to defend her. Levi turns to Peter and says, Peter, you have always been hot-tempered. Now I see you contending against the woman like an adversary. If the Savior made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? Levi's words hang in the air. If the Savior made her worthy. Jesus trusted her. Peter did not. This single scene explains the entire character assassination. Peter's resentment, did he prefer her to us, became the unofficial policy of the growing church. If you can't defeat the message, you defeat the messenger. You silence her. You erase her. Or, as Pope Gregory did 500 years later, you simply rename her. You turn the apostle into the prostitute. The confrontation in that room was the flashpoint. But the question remains, what was this teaching? What was the secret Jesus told her in private? What knowledge did she possess that made Peter so afraid and so jealous that he would rather silence her than listen? So, what was this strange teaching? What did Jesus tell Mary that made Peter so jealous and Andrew so confused? The secret wasn't a set of rules. It wasn't a new law. It was a map of the human soul and its journey out of the material world. In the public Gospels, Jesus' message is simplified for the masses. Repent and believe the good news. Salvation is based on faith in Him and His future sacrifice. But in the Gospel of Mary, Jesus gives His inner circle a completely different, far more advanced teaching. He reveals the mechanics of reality itself. Mary recounts this teaching to the disciples. She explains that the human soul is divine, a spark of light trapped in a material body. The problem, she explains, isn't just sin in the way we think of it like breaking a rule. The problem is ignorance of our true, divine nature. According to the teaching Mary relays, Jesus explained that sin is not a permanent stain on the soul. In fact, she delivers a truly radical line: sin as such does not exist. She says sin is an action we commit when we are ignorant, when we are bound to our material passions, anger, jealousy, lust. But it isn't our nature. Dr. Elaine Pagels, a professor of religion at Princeton University, has spent her life studying these suppressed texts. She explains that this teaching was a direct threat to the emerging church. Why? Because if sin is just temporary ignorance, what happens to the entire system of control? If sin doesn't exist as a permanent stain, you don't need a priest to forgive it. You don't need to come to a church for confession. You don't need an institution to be your mediator. The power is put back into the hands of the individual. But that's only the first half of the secret. The second half is even more dangerous. Mary describes a vision of the soul's ascent. After death, the soul must travel upward through a series of spiritual gates or realms guarded by hostile entities. The text calls them the four powers. These powers represent our inner demons, our attachments, darkness, desire, ignorance, and the wrath of death. Each power will try to stop the soul. They will interrogate it. Where do you come from? What did you do? And here's the secret Jesus gave Mary. The soul that knows itself, that has achieved Gnosis or inner knowledge, can answer them. It can say, I was never bound. I was never defiled. I am free. When the soul gives the right answers, the powers have no hold on it, and it passes by, moving closer to the ultimate light. This is a path to salvation based on knowledge and self-mastery, not on faith and submission. Now you see why Peter exploded. Peter's entire model of the church was being built on the idea that Jesus' death on the cross was the key. His sacrifice paid for your sins. You must have faith in that external event, and the church, which Peter would lead, would be the gatekeeper of that faith. Mary's teaching made that entire structure irrelevant. She was essentially saying, Jesus didn't just die for you. He taught you how to become Him. He taught you how to save yourself. This teaching was pure spiritual dynamite. It turned followers into masters. It turned believers into knowers. In Peter's eyes, this wasn't just heresy, it was anarchy. It destroyed the very concept of a priesthood, of a hierarchy, of his authority. He had to stop her. The teaching was too powerful, too liberating. If this knowledge spread, the church, as an institution, would never have gotten off the ground. And so, the battle lines were drawn. Peter, representing the church of external authority. Mary, representing the path of internal knowledge. We all know who won the history, but the Gospel of Mary is not the only piece of evidence. Peter's attempt to suppress this teaching wasn't a one-time event. This conflict was bigger than just one room and one text. It was a war for the soul of Christianity. And the proof was found in a sealed jar in the middle of the Egyptian desert, almost 1,900 years later. What do you believe is the true path? Is salvation found through faith in an institution, as Peter taught? Or is it found through knowledge of the divine within, as Mary taught? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm fascinated to learn what our community of investigators already believes. The Gospel of Mary was an anomaly for decades, a strange, fragmented text that Orthodox scholars could easily dismiss as a one-off, a bizarre piece of heresy from a fringe cult. They wanted it to be a fringe cult. Then, in 1945, an event in the Egyptian desert changed history forever. An Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Salman was digging for fertilizer near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi. He struck something with his spade. It was a large, sealed earthenware jar. Thinking it might contain gold, he broke it open. Inside, he found no gold. He found something infinitely more valuable: 13 leather-bound books, papyrus codices. He had no idea what they were. He just knew they were old. What he had found was a buried library, a collection of 52 separate texts that had been hidden almost 2,000 years earlier. They were hidden by monks who were desperately trying to save them from a campaign of total annihilation. This discovery is now called the Nag Hammadi Library, and it is the single greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Why? Because it is a library of lost Christianities. These texts were buried around 367 AD. That date is crucial. Why? Because that is the exact year a powerful bishop from Alexandria, Athanasius, sent out an Easter letter to all the churches under his command. In this letter, he declared which books were canonical, meaning officially accepted, and he ordered that all other books be destroyed, burned, erased from history. He was hunting them. The church that Peter had started was now a state-sponsored institution, and it was systematically eliminating all competition. The owners of the Nag Hammadi texts didn't burn them. They buried them, hoping that a future generation would find them. And we did. And what did these heretical texts show us? They prove, beyond any doubt, that Mary's teaching in the Gospel of Mary was not a fringe idea. It was the center of a vast, sophisticated, and powerful spiritual movement that directly rivaled Peter's church. It was the movement of Gnosis, or internal knowledge. And these texts, one after another, all confirm one central, inconvenient fact: Mary Magdalene was their hero. The Nag Hammadi library contains another text, called the Gospel of Thomas, which is just a list of secret sayings from Jesus. It's pure Gnosis. No narrative, no crucifixion, no resurrection. Just the teaching. This is the type of Christianity that Mary represented. But then there's the bombshell, a text called the Gospel of Philip. The Gospel of Philip describes the inner circle of Jesus, and it states, unequivocally, who his most important disciple was. The text reads, "There were three who always walked with the Lord: Mary, his mother, her sister, and Mary Magdalene, the one who was called his koinonos." Koinonos. It's a Greek word. It doesn't mean follower. It doesn't mean disciple. It means companion, partner, consort. This text, written at the same time as the Orthodox Gospels, drives the point home. It says that the Lord loved Mary more than all the disciples, and, this is the famous line, used to kiss her often on her mouth. The manuscript is slightly damaged, but the word is clear. Now, before you jump to conclusions, scholars like Dr. Elaine Pagels argue this kiss was likely a symbolic Gnostic act, a ritualistic way to pass gnosis, or spiritual breath, from master to disciple. It symbolized the transmission of knowledge. But whether you take it symbolically or literally, the point is the same. This is not a prostitute. This is not a background character. This is the co-lead. This is the person Jesus trusted with his deepest teachings. The person he identified as his partner. The confrontation in the Gospel of Mary, Peter's jealous rage, did he prefer her to us? Well, according to the Gospel of Philip, yes, he did. This is why the war against Mary was so total. It wasn't just about one woman's leadership. It was a war against the entire type of Christianity she represented. One where women could be spiritual partners, one where women could receive direct revelation, one where women could be worthy. The Church of Peter couldn't allow that. It was being built on a Roman, patriarchal model. It needed a hierarchy. It needed priests, and bishops, and popes. There was no room for a koinonos. There was only room for a prostitute. So, they buried the texts. They assassinated her character. And they built their church on a foundation that required her to be silent. But they missed one crucial detail, one thing they couldn't erase because it was hidden in plain sight, even in their own Gospels. They couldn't hide her role in the single most important event in Christian history, the resurrection. The patriarchal structure that silenced Mary Magdalene did an almost perfect job. They suppressed her gospel, they buried her teachings, they assassinated her character. But they made one fatal mistake. They couldn't erase her from the official story because the official story depended on her. Let's forget the Gospel of Mary for a moment. Let's forget Nag Hammadi. Let's pick up the one book they want you to read, the official, canonical, King James, or NIV Bible. The evidence is right there, hidden in plain sight. Ask yourself this: when Jesus was arrested and put on trial, where were the men? Where was Peter, the rock, who had just sworn he would die for Jesus? He was in a courtyard, warming himself by a fire, lying to a servant girl. I do not know the man. He was a coward. He fled. The other male disciples, they scattered. They were in hiding, afraid for their lives. But the women, the Gospels, all four of them, agree. The women stayed. They stood at the cross. They watched him die. They were brave when the men were not. And who is listed at the head of that group in almost every account? Mary Magdalene. She did not flee. She did not waver. She stayed until the end. She was the one who followed his body to the tomb. She was the one who marked where he was laid. But the real, undeniable proof comes 3 days later. Sunday morning, the new era, the birth of Christianity. Who is the central character? It's not Peter. The Gospel of John gives the most forensic level detail. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb while it was still dark. She is the first one there. She finds the stone rolled away. She runs, in a panic, to get Peter. They have taken the Lord. And what do Peter and the other disciples do? They doubt her. They have to run to the tomb to check her story. This is a direct echo of the confrontation in the Gospel of Mary. She speaks the truth, and they immediately question her. They look in the tomb, see the linen cloths, get confused, and then they just go home. They give up. But Mary stays. She stays at the tomb, weeping, still faithful, still present. And because she stays, she is the first. She is the one who sees the angels, and she is the one to whom Jesus appears. Think about the cosmic significance of this moment. The single most important event in all of human history, the linchpin of the entire Christian faith, the victory over death itself. And who does the resurrected Christ choose to reveal himself to? Not Peter, the denier, not James, his brother. He reveals himself to Mary Magdalene. The Gospel of John says he speaks her name, Mary. She is the first human being to see the risen Lord. She is the first to hear his voice. And then Jesus gives her a command. He doesn't say, "Go and get Peter so I can talk to him." He doesn't say, "Go tell the men to take over." He commissions her. He gives her the mission. He says, "Go to my brothers and tell them." This is the moment. He makes her, a woman, the apostle to his own male apostles. She is the one chosen to deliver the good news, the gospel, to the very men who would later build the church. This is why in early Christian traditions, before Pope Gregory, she was known by one magnificent title, Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles. She was the first preacher, the first evangelist, the first person to proclaim the resurrection. The entire authority of the church, the entire faith, hinges on the testimony of this one woman. This is the great supreme irony. The very men who would spend the next 2,000 years arguing that women must be silent in church, that women cannot be priests, that women cannot hold authority. Their entire claim to authority rests entirely on the word of a woman they refused to believe. They had to accept her testimony about the resurrection, because without it, they had no story, they had no church, they had no power. But this created a massive problem for them. If Mary was the primary witness, if she was the first one commissioned, if, as the Gospel of Philip says, she was the companion, then Peter wasn't the chosen successor, he was second. This conflict, Mary's spiritual authority versus Peter's institutional authority, was the secret war for the future of Christianity. But this war wasn't just a two-sided fight. There was a third player, a player so central to the story, he's been hidden in plain sight even more effectively than Mary. The man who should have led the church, the man Jesus' followers actually turned to after he was gone. The man who wasn't Peter, he was Jesus' brother. This is the kind of history that has been deliberately buried. It challenges the very foundations of institutional power. If you feel called to dig deeper, to go beyond what we can share in these public videos, I invite you to join our exclusive membership community. This isn't just about watching videos. It's about being part of a network of researchers investigating the texts that were deemed too dangerous to survive. We discuss sources, fragments, and translations we can't make public. Click the Join button below this video. Your journey to understanding matters. So, the stage is set. The battle for Christianity's future is a two-way war. Peter, the rock of institutional authority, versus Mary Magdalene, the companion of Gnostic knowledge. But this is what happens when you've been fed a censored story. You've been tricked into watching a duel, when in reality, it was a three-way war. There was a third contender, a man with a claim so powerful, so legitimate, that he had to be almost completely erased from the narrative. A man the New Testament itself calls James, the brother of the Lord. Let's stop. The word brother makes most modern Christians uncomfortable. We've been taught for centuries, oh, they were cousins, or stepbrothers from Joseph's previous marriage. Why? Because around the 4th and 5th centuries, a new doctrine became extremely popular, the perpetual virginity of Mary, Jesus' mother. If Mary remained a virgin her entire life, then Jesus could not have biological siblings. So, church authorities had to retroactively fix the story. They had to invent explanations for the people the Gospels explicitly name as his brothers. Don't take my word for it. Read the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 3. The people in Jesus' own hometown say, "Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And aren't his sisters here with us?" The Greek word used there is adelphos. It means brother, son of the same mother. But the most damning proof comes from the man who created Roman Christianity, the Apostle Paul. In his letter to the Galatians, written just 2 decades after the crucifixion, Paul describes his own conversion. He says that after 3 years, he went to Jerusalem to meet the leadership. And who did he meet? "I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother." Paul, the contemporary, the eyewitness, writing to a church, calls him the Lord's brother. This isn't a metaphor, it's a statement of fact. So who was this James? He wasn't just a brother, he was the leader. We have been sold the story that Jesus gave the keys to the kingdom to Peter, and Peter became the first pope, the undisputed leader. The historical record, the Bible itself, tells a completely different story. After Jesus was gone, Peter was not the leader of the church. The leader of the mother church in Jerusalem, the headquarters of the entire movement, was James. James the Just, the brother of Jesus. Read the book of Acts, chapter 15. This is the first great crisis of the church. Do new Gentile converts need to be circumcised and follow Jewish law? Peter gets a vision. Paul is out preaching to the Gentiles. They are all in conflict. So, what do? They don't ask Pope Peter. They all go to Jerusalem for a council. And who presides? Who listens to all the arguments? And who, at the end, stands up and gives the final judgment? It's James. James says, "My judgment is," and he lays down the law. Peter, Paul, they obey him. James was the boss. The Jewish historian Josephus, a non-Christian writing at the time, confirms this. When he describes the history of Jerusalem, he doesn't mention Peter. He describes the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ. To the people of Jerusalem, the leader of the Jesus movement was, without question, the next of kin, the blood relative. Now, do you see the problem? The church that Peter and Paul were building for the Gentiles, for the Romans, was a new religion, a religion that abolished Jewish law. But the original church, led by James, was Jewish. They were Jews who believed their Jewish Messiah had come. They still went to the temple. They still followed the law. These were 2 rival versions of Christianity. And for the Roman Pauline version to survive, it had to destroy the legitimacy of the Jerusalem James version. It wasn't enough to just silence Mary and her Gnostic path. They also had to silence James and his Jewish path. They had to sever Christianity from its Jewish roots. They had to make it a new religion, not the fulfillment of an old one. So what did they do? They sidelined James. In Roman church history, he becomes a minor footnote. Peter, the missionary to Rome, is elevated to Prince of the Apostles. And Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, the companion of Jesus, the leader of the Gnostic wing. She was the perfect scapegoat. In the war between these 3 factions, Peter's Roman faction won. And the winners write the history books. They took Mary, the powerful Gnostic leader, and turned her into the prostitute. They took James, the Jewish law-abiding leader, and turned him into a cousin. They erased both of their rival claimants to authority. They scrubbed the record, leaving only one man, Peter, standing as the rock on which their church would be built. It was a political masterpiece. But they all, James, Mary, and Peter, learned from the same man. They were all fighting over the teachings of Jesus. But where did Jesus get these teachings? Where did a carpenter's son from a backwater town in Galilee get the Gnosis that Mary understood, the new law that James inherited, and the authority that Peter claimed? The official Gospels are silent. They skip from his birth to a brief appearance at age 12. And then, nothing. He vanishes for 18 years. The Roman Church calls these the silent years. But the Ethiopian Bible and the traditions it preserved never called them silent. They called them his education. So, we have a 3-way war. Faction 1, Peter's Roman Church, a church of faith. It's hierarchical, patriarchal, and built on the authority of Jesus' sacrifice and Peter's appointment. Its audience is the Roman, Gentile world. Faction 2, James's Jerusalem Church, a church of law. It's Jewish, led by the blood brother of the Messiah, and built on the idea that Jesus fulfilled the law, not abolished it. Its audience is the Jewish world. Faction 3, Mary's Gnostic Path, a church of knowledge. It's mystical, internal, and built on the secret, advanced teachings Jesus gave to his inner circle. Its audience is the spiritual seeker, male or female. The history you were taught is simply the story of how Faction 1, Peter, won. And to win, he had to destroy the legitimacy of the other two. To defeat James, Peter's faction simply had to wait. In 70 AD, the Roman legions sacked Jerusalem, the temple was destroyed, the Jewish rebellion was crushed. James's entire church, the Jewish Christian headquarters, was scattered and obliterated. Faction 2 was gone. This left a showdown between Peter's Roman Church and Mary's Gnostic path. And this is where the final, most brilliant piece of propaganda was deployed. Peter's church needed to answer one crucial question: where did Jesus get his wisdom? The Gnostics, like Mary, had an answer. He was the ultimate Gnostic. He achieved perfect knowledge, and he taught us the map to do the same. But Peter's church couldn't use that answer. If salvation is a map of knowledge, then anyone can follow it. You don't need a priest. You don't need a bishop. You don't need Peter. So they invented a different answer. They called them the silent years. Those 18 years, from age 12 to 30, that the canonical Gospels simply skip. This silence is the most convenient tool the Roman Church ever had. Because in this silence, they could claim Jesus' wisdom wasn't learned. It was downloaded. It was supernaturally given to him at baptism. He wasn't a master who achieved Gnosis. He was a divine being who had it from the beginning. This makes his wisdom exclusive and unrepeatable. It means you cannot become like him by learning. You can only be saved by believing in him. It's the difference between a teacher who shows you the path and a king who simply grants you a pardon. Peter's church chose the king. But the traditions that Mary and even James represented, they remembered those 18 years. Ancient traditions, preserved outside of Roman control in Ethiopia, in Persia. In apocryphal texts, they don't call them silent years. They call them his travel years. They are the traditions that say Jesus traveled. He went to Egypt, a center of ancient magic and mysticism. He studied with the Therapeuta, the Gnostic healers. Some legends even say he traveled as far as India and studied with the mystics of the East. In this version, Jesus was a seeker before he was a master. He gathered the world's wisdom. He mastered the path himself. And then he returned. He found his koinonos, his partner, Mary Magdalene. He recognized in her a knower, someone who understood. And he gave her the advanced teachings. Now do you see? This is the grand conspiracy. The war against Mary was not just about silencing a woman, it was about destroying the path of Gnosis. To win, Peter's Roman faction had to erase all three parts of the Gnostic story. First, they had to erase Jesus' education, the 18 silent years. They had to make his wisdom exclusive to him, not teachable. Second, they had to erase his family, James, the Jewish heir. They had to make his church Roman, not Jewish. And third, they had to erase his partner, Mary Magdalene. The one who proved the Gnosis was teachable. The one who proved a woman could be the greatest apostle. The one who proved the path was about knowledge, not just faith. They took the scalpels of history and surgically removed all three. They made James a cousin. They made Jesus silent. And, most viciously, they made Mary Magdalene a prostitute. The character assassination of Mary was the linchpin. It was the single act that locked the new, safe religion into place. Because think about the difference. A repentant prostitute needs Peter's church. She is broken. She is sinful. She needs the institution for forgiveness. She needs the priest. She is eternally grateful and eternally subordinate. But Mary Magdalene, the koinonos, the Gnostic master, the apostle to the apostles, she doesn't need Peter. She doesn't need his church. She doesn't need his forgiveness. She has the Gnosis. She has the teaching. She has the direct commission from the risen Christ himself. She is the alternative. The woman you've been taught to pity was the woman who held the keys to a Christianity that was lost. A Christianity that gave you power, not just rules. A Christianity that saw you as a spark of God to be ignited, not a sinner to be controlled. The Gospel of Mary, buried in the sand, did not just reveal her true role. It revealed the real war. It wasn't a war for the soul of a single woman. It was a war for the soul of God. And for 2,000 years, we have only been told the story written by the victors. The investigation never ends. What we've uncovered today is only one thread, the story of Mary. The next is the story of James, then the story of Thomas. If you are ready to question everything you've been taught, then subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. You will not want to miss what is coming next. And if you are serious, if you feel called to move from a passive believer to an active knower, click the join button and become a member of our private research community. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next investigation.